A massive shift is happening in global power politics, and India is at the center of it, calculating, positioning, and moving with a precision that the world is only beginning to fully understand. Geopolitics is all about timing, and India's timing right now looks absolutely flawless. For years, many countries have tried to interfere in India's interests, raise India's internal matters on global platforms, and strengthen India's rivals. But India's message is now clear. If you create problems in India's neighborhood, India can build pressure in your backyard. This is not emotional diplomacy. This is not just aggression. This is strategic patience. India is positioning itself perfectly, and the world is seeing a new kind of Indian foreign policy, confident, calculated, and impossible to ignore. Because here is what happened in just 1 week. The United States Secretary of State flew to New Delhi, not to pressure India into alignment, not to issue ultimatums. He came to ask for help. After facing a major diplomatic setback in Beijing, he came to repair ties, to seek India's cooperation, to acknowledge without saying the words out loud that when you lose in China, you come to India. At the same time, India signed a military pact with a country sitting right at Turkey's doorstep, sending the clearest possible signal to both Ankara and Islamabad that interference has a cost, and that cost is now being collected. And on live international television, in front of the world's press, India's foreign minister looked America's top diplomat in the eye and delivered what may be the most confident statement in the history of Indian diplomacy. Stay with us, as you do not want to miss a single moment of this diplomatic masterclass by India. Today we break it all down, move by move, moment by moment, one of the most remarkable weeks of strategic execution in India's modern history. To understand what India just did, you need to go back in time. For decades, Turkey has been one of India's most persistent geopolitical irritants, not through war, not through direct conflict, but through something almost more dangerous: constant, deliberate diplomatic needling. Every year at the United Nations General Assembly, Turkey raises the Kashmir issue. Every year, Ankara's delegates question India's sovereignty over its own territory. Every year, Turkish officials stand beside Pakistani leaders and repeat talking points that come straight from Islamabad's playbook. And then there are the weapons. Turkey has been a consistent supplier of military technology to Pakistan. The Bayraktar TB2 drones that Pakistan has been acquiring, Turkish-made. The military cooperation agreements signed between Ankara and Islamabad, growing every year. The defense partnership between Turkey and Pakistan, openly aimed at countering India, it has been expanding since the early 2000s. Now Turkey has unveiled new extended-range missile systems. Reports from regional defense analysts indicate these platforms extend Turkish strike capability in ways that concern India's strategic community. India noticed. But here's the fascinating thing about how India responded. It did not respond with anger. It did not respond with threats. It responded with something far more elegant. It responded by identifying Turkey's single greatest vulnerability, and that vulnerability has a name: Cyprus. In 1974, Turkey invaded the northern third of the island of Cyprus. It has occupied that territory ever since. In 1983, Turkey backed the declaration of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The entire world said no. Every single member of the United Nations, every single one, refused to recognize that declaration. The only country that recognizes Northern Cyprus as a separate state is Turkey itself. The United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 541, condemning the declaration as legally invalid. This is Turkey's open wound, its most exposed flank, the issue that keeps Turkish diplomats permanently on the defensive, the reason Turkey remains frozen out of the European Union despite being a NATO member, the reason Ankara cannot fully normalize relations with the Western world. And now India has walked right up to that wound. Following Prime Minister Modi's landmark visit to Cyprus in June 2025, the first by an Indian Prime Minister in over 2 decades, Cyprus President Nikos Christodoulides flew to New Delhi in May 2026 for a return state visit. What emerged from these 2 meetings taken together was historic. The 2 countries signed a comprehensive counterterrorism memorandum of understanding. They unveiled a 5-year defense cooperation roadmap covering the period through 2029. Intelligence sharing frameworks were established. Joint maritime security protocols were discussed. And then came the detail that sent shock waves through Turkish strategic circles. India opened the door to potential defense exports to Cyprus, including the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile system. Let that sink in for a moment. BrahMos, the fastest cruise missile in the world, capable of traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, a weapon that has already been acquired by the Philippines and Vietnam, fundamentally altering the strategic balance in Southeast Asia, potentially going to an island that sits right in Turkey's backyard, an island whose territory Turkey currently occupies. Think about what message that sends. If you raise Kashmir at the United Nations, India can raise Cyprus in the Mediterranean. If you arm Pakistan against India, India can arm Cyprus against you. The rule is simple, the rule is clear, and the rule is being enforced. You poke India's interests. India will create consequences right in your own backyard. India didn't just make a smart move. India made a perfectly timed smart move. Because right now, the Eastern Mediterranean is becoming one of the most geopolitically significant bodies of water on the planet. Turkey and Greece are locked in competing claims over maritime boundaries, natural gas reserves, and airspace. Turkey and Israel have had severely strained relations for years, with repeated diplomatic crises. Turkey's relationship with the European Union is at a historic low point, and the question of Cypriot reunification remains one of Europe's most intractable frozen conflicts. Into this complicated high-stakes theater, India has just inserted itself, not as a troublemaker, not as an aggressive power, but as a strategic partner to one of the most vulnerable sovereign states in the region. Cyprus needs capable allies. It needs defense partners. It needs countries with advanced weapons technology who are willing to stand alongside it. India is now that country. This is not just a bilateral deal between two friendly nations. This is India planting its flag in the most watched, most contested maritime zone outside of the Indo-Pacific. India's footprint is now global, and it happened quietly, professionally, without bluster, without aggression. That is the Modi government's signature: patient, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Now let's shift from the Mediterranean to the moment that arguably generated more conversation worldwide than any other diplomatic event of the week. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived in New Delhi, and what followed was extraordinary. At the joint press conference with External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, a reporter, Sidhan Sibal, stood up and asked a direct, pointed question. He asked Marco Rubio, "There are racist comments being directed against Indians from within the United States. What is the U.S. government's position on this?" Now pause, think about that question. An Indian journalist on Indian soil at an Indian press conference asking the United States Secretary of State to account for anti-Indian racism coming out of America. That alone was remarkable. Rubio's response was, "Every country in the world has stupid people."
I don't know how to address that, but I'll take that very seriously about the comments. Look, I'm sure that there are people that have made comments online and other places, because every country in the world has stupid people. I'm sure there's stupid people here. There's stupid people in the United States that make dumb comments all the time.
The clip went viral within hours, because here is the exquisite irony that everyone immediately noticed. Just recently, U.S. President Donald Trump had shared a post on Truth Social that referred to India as, and this is documented, this is verified, a hellhole. The post explicitly suggested that Indian immigrants were taking opportunities from Americans using language that most people would describe as deeply derogatory. And some of the loudest, most persistent anti-Indian rhetoric online had been coming directly from hardline MAGA-aligned accounts. The very political base that Donald Trump represents. The very movement that Marco Rubio himself has become a senior member of. So when Marco Rubio said, "Every country has stupid people," he had, in a single sentence, accidentally described his own president and his own party's core voters as stupid. On international television, in front of India. Was it a slip? Was it an intentional distancing from the extremist wing of his own movement? Was it simply an honest answer that carried consequences he didn't think through in the moment? Whatever the explanation, The effect was the same. India's press held America accountable on Indian soil, and America's top diplomat could not deflect the question without implicating his own leader. That is a different kind of India than the world has seen before. Let's step back further, because the real story of why Rubio was in New Delhi is even more revealing. Before landing in India, the United States had invested enormous diplomatic capital into engaging China. The trade war between Washington and Beijing had escalated to levels that genuinely threatened global supply chains. The United States had imposed sweeping tariffs. China had retaliated. The world was watching. American officials believed, or hoped, that high-level engagement could produce some kind of deal, some kind of agreement, some kind of framework that would stabilize the situation. What they got instead was a wall. Beijing made clear it was not going to accept American terms. China's leadership publicly pushed back on what they characterized as economic coercion. The trade discussions did not produce the breakthroughs Washington needed. And in the global perception game, China came out of the exchange looking confident, while America looked desperate. Even the New York Times, America's most influential newspaper, ran reporting framing Rubio's India visit as damage control, a cleanup operation after the China frustration. And so the United States, the same United States that had imposed significant tariffs on Indian goods, turned around and flew its top diplomat to New Delhi to ask India for help, to ask India to buy American energy exports, to ask India to align more closely with Washington in the great power competition with China, to ask India to be the partner that China refused to be. This moment says everything about the shift in global power dynamics. When you fail in Beijing, you come to New Delhi. That is not where India was 20 years ago. That is not where India was even 10 years ago. But that is exactly where India is today. While the United States was putting pressure on India to align its energy policy with American interests, to buy more American LNG, to reduce Russian oil imports, to participate in Western-led energy sanctions regimes, India was quietly doing something different. India was buying Venezuelan oil. Lots of it. Venezuela's crude oil, heavily sanctioned by the United States for years, had become one of the most discounted oil supplies in the world. No major Western buyer would touch it. The geopolitical cost was simply too high. India calculated differently. Indian refineries, particularly those run by Reliance Industries and Indian Oil Corporation, had the technical capability to process Venezuela's heavy crude. The discount they were receiving on this oil was substantial. The savings were real, tangible, and economically significant for a country that imports roughly 85% of its oil needs. And so India bought it. In recent months, Venezuela has become one of India's top oil suppliers, alongside Russia, which India has also continued importing from despite relentless pressure from Washington and Brussels to join Western sanctions. Now here is the layer of this story that makes it even more striking. U.S. companies now have significant involvement in the management and operations of Venezuelan oil infrastructure under certain licensing arrangements. So in a technical sense, when India buys Venezuelan oil, some portion of that value flows back through American corporate structures. India is not opposing America. It is not trying to hurt America. It is simply making rational economic decisions in India's national interest. And while India has been successfully processing Venezuelan crude, China's position has been far more complicated. China has poured enormous investment, estimates range in the billions of dollars, into Venezuelan energy assets. But project delays, political instability, corruption, and operational dysfunction have left much of that investment effectively frozen. India invested less. India committed less. India took less risk. And India is walking away with cheaper oil and a functioning supply chain. That is not luck. That is strategic intelligence. In the middle of this extraordinary week, one figure stood above all others as the embodiment of the new Indian diplomatic posture. External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramanyam Jaishankar, with Marco Rubio standing beside him, the representative of the world's most powerful military, the envoy of the United States of America. Jaishankar said the following in clear and unambiguous terms. He said, "India has strong ties with Russia. We have relationships with all the parties involved in the Ukraine conflict. We have strong relations with Russia. We have them with Europe. We have them with Ukraine. We have them with the United States. And the question is, how do you manage them all? He continued, this is what multi-alignment means. Because today's India has a range of interests which requires managing multiple relationships where India's interests are taken care of. Listen to that again. In front of the American Secretary of State, India's foreign minister stated openly and proudly that India maintains deep ties with Russia, America's most adversarial relationship in the world right now. And Rubio sat there. He could not protest. He could not push back. Because India is too important. Because America needs India. Because the geopolitical math of the 21st century means that Washington cannot afford to alienate New Delhi. Jaishankar did not say this with arrogance. He did not say it with hostility. He said it with the calm, measured confidence of a country that knows its own weight. That confidence is earned. India is the world's most populous country with 1.4 billion people, the majority of them young, educated, and increasingly connected to the global economy. India has the world's fourth largest military by active personnel. India is the world's largest democracy, and India is now, clearly, demonstrably, undeniably, operating as a first-class global power. The term Jaishankar used, multi-alignment, deserves a dedicated examination. Because it is the defining doctrine of India's foreign policy in the Modi era, and it is deeply misunderstood in Western capitals. During the Cold War, the world was organized into blocs. You were either with America or with the Soviet Union. India was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement, a refusal to be absorbed into either bloc. For decades, this was seen as a weakness, as fence-sitting, as an inability to make hard choices. The new doctrine is not non-alignment, it is multi-alignment. The distinction is crucial. Non-alignment means staying out. Multi-alignment means participating in everything, on India's own terms. India is part of the Quad, the security dialogue with the United States, Japan, and Australia, designed explicitly to counter Chinese maritime aggression. India is also part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a grouping that includes China and Russia, and which operates as a counterweight to Western-led institutions. India maintains deep defense ties with Russia, the source of a large proportion of India's military equipment for decades. India also conducts advanced military exercises with the United States, France, and Israel. India is a member of BRICS, the emerging economy bloc that explicitly positions itself as an alternative to the Western-dominated financial order. India is also a founding member of the G20, where it has been one of the most constructive voices for a rules-based international order. This is not inconsistency. This is sophistication. This is a country that has enough strategic depth, enough economic weight, and enough diplomatic confidence to say to every major power simultaneously, we are your partner, but we are nobody's vassal. Zoom out even further. Because the events of this single week do not exist in isolation. They are the visible tip of a much larger, much more deliberate transformation that has been underway for the past decade. Defense exports. A decade ago, India was one of the world's largest arms importers. Today, India is rapidly building a domestic defense manufacturing sector and exporting weapons to multiple countries. BrahMos has gone to the Philippines. Tejas fighter jet deals are under discussion with several nations. Artillery systems, radar equipment, drones, all flowing out of India to partner countries across Southeast Asia, Africa, and now potentially the Mediterranean. Digital infrastructure. India built Aadhaar, the world's largest biometric identity system, covering 1.4 billion people, and then used it as the foundation for UPI, the Unified Payments Interface that now processes more digital transactions every month than Visa and MasterCard combined globally. Other countries are now adopting variants of India's digital public infrastructure stack. Space technology. ISRO's Chandrayaan-3 successfully landed on the moon's south pole in 2023, a historic first. India is the fourth country in history to soft land on the moon. Its cost per mission efficiency is unmatched anywhere in the world. Economic growth. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. Manufacturing is booming as companies diversify supply chains away from China. Semiconductor investments are arriving. Data centers are expanding. The production-linked incentive scheme is attracting global companies from Apple to Samsung. All of this provides the foundation for the diplomatic confidence you saw this week. India can look Rubio in the eye and talk about Russia because India is too economically vital to punish. India can partner with Cyprus to send a message to Turkey because India has advanced weapons worth exporting. India can buy Venezuelan oil at a discount because India has world-class refineries capable of processing any type of crude. The tools of modern power are economic, technological, and diplomatic, and India has been quietly, systematically building all of them. So what does it all mean? What is India actually saying to the world through the events of this remarkable week? The message to Turkey is precise and unmistakable. India has a long memory and India has a long reach. For every United Nations speech about Kashmir, there will be a strategic partnership in your neighborhood. For every weapon shipped to Pakistan, there will be a defense conversation with your most sensitive adversary. The cost of antagonizing India is rising. The days of a consequence-free relationship with Islamabad that also expects warm ties with New Delhi, those days are over. The message to Pakistan is equally clear. India's strategic options are growing faster than yours are. The countries that stand with Pakistan are watching their influence shrink. The countries that stand with India are watching theirs expand. Choose wisely. The message to the United States is profound and delivered with respect, but without ambiguity. India is your most important strategic partner in Asia. We want this relationship to work, but this relationship works on terms of equality. You cannot impose tariffs on us, describe our country in derogatory terms, and then expect us to realign our entire foreign policy to serve your interests. We are partners. We are not dependents. The message to China is quiet but unmistakable. India has options everywhere. In the Indian Ocean, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, and now in the Mediterranean. Every space you try to dominate, India will find a way to be present. And the message to the world, to the global South, to emerging economies, to every country that has been told it must choose a side, is perhaps the most powerful of all. You do not have to choose. India has shown you that a country can chart its own course, that strategic independence is achievable, that you can engage with Russia and America, with China and the Quad, with the West and BRICS, all at the same time, if you are strong enough, smart enough, and principled enough to do so. This is the India that PM Modi has been building. Not a country that shouts about its ambitions, a country that executes them. Not a country that reacts to others' moves, a country that forces others to react to its moves. Not a country that asks for a seat at the table, a country that has become the table. From signing defense pacts in the Mediterranean, to holding America accountable on its own soil, to buying discounted oil despite Western pressure, to announcing its independent foreign policy with calm and total confidence, India had an extraordinary week. But here's the honest truth. This wasn't a lucky week. This wasn't a coincidental moment. This was the fruit of years of patient, discipline, strategic investment in military capability, economic strength, diplomatic relationships, and above all, in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly where you are going. India knows, and the world is beginning to understand. Let's be honest about something. For decades, for far too long, too many people around the world looked at India and saw something small. They saw stereotypes. They saw weakness. They saw a country that could be pressured, lectured, and quietly ignored whenever it became inconvenient. Some still do. Even today, certain foreign journalists, certain commentators, certain so-called experts sit in their studios and speak about India with a strange combination of arrogance and ignorance that is almost impressive in how completely disconnected it is from reality. They have not updated their picture of India. They are still working from a mental image that is 20, 30, or even 40 years out of date. And that gap between the India they imagine and the India that actually exists is now so enormous that it has become almost embarrassing to watch. Because let us talk about what India actually is. 1.4 billion people, the largest democracy on the planet, a civilization that has been continuously producing knowledge, art, mathematics, philosophy, and trade for thousands of years. A country that just landed a spacecraft on the south pole of the moon, a feat that only India has achieved in human history. A country whose digital payments infrastructure now processes more transactions every single month than Visa and MasterCard combined globally. A country that is exporting supersonic missiles to nations across Southeast Asia and now opening doors to the Mediterranean. A country whose engineers, doctors, scientists, and entrepreneurs are reshaping industries from Silicon Valley to Singapore. A country building infrastructure at a scale the world has genuinely never seen before. And yet, there are still people who think India can be mocked. Still people who think India can be reduced to a punchline. Still people who think that old stereotypes, chaos, weakness, dependence, still define this nation. That era is over. It did not end with a single event. It did not end with one speech or one missile test or one diplomatic summit. It ended because India simply outgrew it. Because the reality on the ground became so undeniable, so vast, so impossible to contain within old narratives, that the stereotypes collapsed under the weight of the evidence. And what we are watching right now, these diplomatic moves, these strategic partnerships, these moments where Indian officials look the world's most powerful diplomats in the eye and speak with total, unshakable confidence. This is not the beginning of India's rise. This is the world finally being forced to notice what was already there. India is not waiting for permission anymore. India is not asking to be taken seriously. India is not standing quietly in the corner, hoping someone will acknowledge its potential. India is moving fast. India is building fast. India is shaping conversations that will define the next century. And whether some people are comfortable with that or not is, frankly, no longer India's problem. The 21st century belongs to countries that are bold enough to act on their own terms. And India is acting fast. So if you believe these stories deserve to be told, with facts, with confidence, with the pride they deserve, then share this video with someone who still holds on to outdated ideas about what India is and what India is capable of. This is only the beginning of the stories we are going to tell together. This is not just content, this is history, unfolding in real time, right in front of us. And trust me when I say this, we are just getting started. See you in the next one.